This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, June 9th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of coronavirus, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on and appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Family and friends are set to honor George Floyd with a private funeral Tuesday in the U.S. city of Houston, 2 weeks after his death in police custody inspired renewed protests against police brutality in numerous cities across the country. After the funeral, Houston police will escort the funeral procession to the nearby city of Pearland, Texas, where Floyd will be buried. The U.S. protests in support of George Floyd have triggered demonstrations in other countries, with people showing both solidarity with those marching in the United States and calling attention to cases in their own countries. In South Africa, demonstrators led by the ultra-left economic freedom fighters gathered outside U.S. missions in Pretoria, Johannesburg, and Cape Town, according to Reuters. In Houston and North Carolina, hundreds gathered to say their final goodbye to George Floyd. Here in Washington, D.C., House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other lawmakers took a knee in the Capitol and held a moment of silence. This comes as thousands continue to protest worldwide against racial injustice. VOA correspondent Maria Diallo has more.
We are here to honor George Floyd.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi led House and Senate Democrats in a moment of silence at the Capitol's Emancipation Hall. They took a knee for nearly 9 minutes to symbolize the length of time prosecutors say George Floyd, handcuffed and face down, was pinned under a white police officer's knee before he was later pronounced dead at a Minnesota hospital. Floyd's death sparked worldwide protest against police brutality and racial injustice. Over the weekend, thousands more continued to protest. Floyd's death also prompted the National Football League Commissioner Roger Goodell to say that the league was wrong for not listening earlier to players fighting for racial equality.
We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter. I personally protest with you and want to be part of the much-needed change in this country. Without Black players, there would be no National Football League. And the protests around the country are emblematic of the centuries of silence, inequality, and oppression of Black players, coaches, fans, and staff.
Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, Floyd's girlfriend and others gathered at a park on Saturday to remember Floyd and release balloons to honor lives lost at the hands of law enforcement.
Floyd is here with us. He loves us, and I've been wanting for a long time, and whatever religion you are, however you pray, I've been wanting to thank Father God and be with a group of people that love him and support us, and just thank Father God. Thank you, Father God, for giving us Floyd.
Floyd was also remembered in his North Carolina hometown by mourners who waited hours for a glimpse of his golden coffin. And in Houston, Texas, the final of a series of memorials in Floyd's honor, the public was able to view his casket at the Fountain of Praise Church. Floyd will be buried at the Houston, Texas Memorial Gardens Cemetery, where he will be laid to rest next to his mother. Maria Diallo, VOA News.
Black Lives Matter protesters flooded the streets of European cities again at the weekend in solidarity with demonstrations in the United States, which were triggered by the death of a 46-year-old African-American man, George Floyd, 2 weeks ago in Minneapolis. The protesters in Britain and in other European cities are tapping into deep-rooted anger over a perceived lack of understanding of their country's colonial histories. Henry Ridgwell reports from London.
In Bristol, a city that once boomed on the profits of slavery, a statue of Edward Colston, a 17th century slave trader, was torn down Sunday. It was long a divisive symbol, a tribute to a man who built schools and hospitals, but who enslaved tens of thousands of black Africans, shipping them across the Atlantic, a journey that killed many men, women and children.
We have to walk these streets and see that statue of Colston's every day. That's what it means. That statue is a kick in the face to all black people. It's a disgrace. And now look at it. Now look at it. Gone. You're gone. I'm gone.
The toppling of the statue mirrors similar debates in the United States, where activists have demanded the removal of statues honouring Confederate-era figures like General Robert E. Lee in Virginia. Bristol's mayor sympathises with the protesters in his city.
We have a city to run. We need to have order. But if you fail to understand these kind of events, then you create the conditions for more and bigger types of events like these, in the future. It's a very significant symbolic act, but it doesn't deliver the affordable homes, the job opportunities, the educational opportunities, the access to the, professions, political power, economic power that actually underpins race inequality.
The British government takes a different view.
Sheer vandalism and disorder completely is unacceptable, and it's right actually the police follow up on that and make sure that justice is undertaken.
Protests erupted in several cities across Britain over the weekend. Tens of thousands of people marched on the US Embassy in London.
I've just had enough of it. I'm sick of having to explain to my children that because they're black, they have to act a certain way, they have to behave a certain way, they have to work 10 times harder to get anywhere in life.
There were violent clashes between some demonstrators and police in London. 22 officers were injured, including a policewoman who fell from her horse after it bolted. The riderless horse trampled a protester. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the demonstrations had been subverted by thuggery. In Glasgow, Scotland, activists changed the names of streets linked to slave traders. In Belgium, protesters defaced a statue of King Leopold II, who oversaw the killing of millions of Congolese during colonial rule. Back in Bristol, the fallen statue of Edward Colston was dumped into the harbour, where his slave ships used to dock 350 years ago. Critics of its destruction say the statue was an important reminder of a dark and complicated history. Others say its raising has done far more to educate Britons about black oppression, a history that for many resonates deeply today. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Diving deeper into why the protests in 2020 seemingly have more momentum than years past, VOA Steve Miller, host of the International Edition radio program, reached out to Dana Weiner, Associate Professor of American History at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Canada. Miller began by asking Weiner about the intersection and trajectory of issues affecting African Americans and police brutality.
Many people are inspired by the ongoing protests that are happening in the last few weeks since George Floyd's death. And in many of your listeners' home countries, people of all backgrounds have been, as you said, rising up, coming to the streets. And despite the particular dangers of the COVID-19 pandemic, and people are sharing sorrow, they're sharing anger and sentiments of solidarity around the world. But this has a very long history. And it's important to recognize that these protests are not only about Mr. Floyd himself and people's, but many people have known around in the U.S. and around the world for centuries that there's a problem with race-based police brutality and widespread anti-Black violence more generally. Many scholars and activists trace the origins of U.S. policing back to slave patrols during the time of slavery. So when some people are looking at these phenomena, they're seeing a through line going all the way back to a time when it was legal to own people. And also going along with that in terms of things that have escalated police brutality, in many jurisdictions, police departments have become increasingly militarized. You can trace that back to the 60s and the 70s, but it really has also picked up a lot really in the last several decades.
You know, speaking of 1968, because that is the year that a lot of people are drawing parallels to, because you look online and you see pictures of police lines, you see pictures of protesters. As a historian of American history, what are you seeing as potential parallels, similarities, and any discrepancies or differences?
Historians are always talking about context. You'll hear from most of us, no two times are the same. So I would say there definitely are parallels, but there are limits to those parallels between these historical moments. You can see parallels in the sense that they're both moments in which people have risen up against multiple sources of oppression, including a strong movement by African Americans and like-minded folks against what we now call structural racism. In both eras, freedom of assembly has been absolutely vital, and the crackdown on freedom of expression and police violence against protesters has inspired more people to take to the streets. The uprisings in 1968 were most directly triggered by the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but they were also part of a long-running wave of protests about civil rights and about the Vietnam War, among other issues. Of course, notoriously, you're talking about the images, the 1968 Democratic Convention was rife with police conflict with protesters. And as an outcome of the turmoil in 1968, Richard Nixon, who was the Republican candidate for president that year, was able to present himself as a law and order man and claim the nation would be safer in his hands in the future, was able to become president that year, of course. In terms of the current sitting president, Donald Trump has an overtly pro-policing approach in terms of his messages. And for decades, he has identified with that law and order kind of stance. We can date this back to his pre-political days in New York, most notably his actions in the 1989 Central Park 5 case.
It's very interesting to see how these effects of these protests are bringing about change almost seemingly more rapidly than those in 1968.
Certainly, and that is something that many people are taking heart from. Many people are drawing solidarity from the visible results they're seeing from the protests. These include such results as the arrests and the increase in charges of the officers involved in George Floyd's killing, and the cancellation of contracts in police forces for schools in Minnesota and in other jurisdictions. So there are actually lists circulating of, look at all these things that are happening, look at this rapid action. And it does seem to be perhaps between the scale of the protests and their global nature, and also possibly the role of technology in circulating all sorts of information, that this moment has the potential for outcome.
And lasting change, perhaps.
Perhaps, yes.
All right. Dr. Dana Weiner is an associate professor of American history at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Canada. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to speak with us.
Thank you.
That was VOA Steve Miller speaking with Dana Weiner, Associate Professor of American History at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Canada. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, how one restaurant in Ivory Coast has been impacted by COVID-19. We'll be right back after this break.
Hello, I'm Lenore Moudou, your VOA health correspondent.
Let us be perfectly clear. All countries.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there is no information or evidence suggesting that the coronavirus can be transmitted by mosquitoes.
There are 2 published studies.
It is a respiratory virus which spreads primarily through droplets. generated when an infected person coughs or sneezes or through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose.
This happened during pandemics in the past.
For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Global COVID-19 lockdown restrictions may have prevented 3 million deaths from coronavirus, according to information revealed in a new study by the Imperial College of London. According to the latest figures from the US-based Johns Hopkins Institute, the total number of COVID-19 infections worldwide now stands at just over 7.1 million people, with at least 406,000 confirmed deaths. The United States is the leader in both categories, with total infections at nearly 2 million and more than 111,000 deaths. Now to Nigeria, where the health minister says up to 60% of the mystery deaths in Kano state in recent months were likely due to COVID-19. Osagie Ehanire says 979 deaths were recorded in 8 local government areas in Kano state, peaking in the second week of April. Kano state officials had said the deaths were caused by complications from hypertension, diabetes, meningitis, and acute malaria, and not coronavirus. Nigeria currently has over 12,000 confirmed coronavirus cases and at least 350 deaths. In other health news, Amref is a non-profit organization dedicated to increasing sustainable health access to African communities. Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu spoke with Camilla Knox-Peebles, CEO of Amref Health Africa UK, to discuss the organization's work in Africa and some of the priorities during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Camilla Knox-Peebles, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Lino. Hi.
First of all, would you briefly tell us about Amref? What is the mission of the organization and some of the services provided, particularly in Africa?
Amref works in 35 countries in Africa. It provides healthcare to marginalized and disadvantaged communities in both rural and urban areas. And its work spans from providing healthcare training to health professionals like nurses and midwives, but also to community health workers. And it also pays a lot of attention to the actual enabling environment for good health by ensuring that those same communities have access to clean water and sanitation. Now, currently, during the pandemic, we are working very closely with Africa CDC, Africa WHO, and other stakeholders and ministries of health in a number of different countries to increase the diagnostic capacity in country on COVID-19, and as well as the testing capacity.
What kind of impact are you seeing on the communities that you service with regards to COVID-19? How much of an impact?
So the impact varies a little because the measures of different governments have been a little different, yeah? And what we're seeing is that regardless what's happening is because COVID-19 is so much in the news, that there's quite a lot of fear and mistrust around what exactly it is. And we're starting to see a reluctance to, for example, in women going to antenatal and postnatal clinics, ensuring that they have that care, especially in the case of Uganda, actually. We're also seeing an increase because in all cases, schools are closed. We're starting to see an increase in things like negative practices like female genital mutilation. We're seeing a slight rise in that as girls are no longer in schools. Those are some of the first incidences. And the other thing I would say is that treatment for other terminal disease is so important. Tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS is also, there's a decline in people searching and getting that treatment.
We're seeing a big problem with frontline workers being affected in this pandemic. So what is the case with community health workers? How do you protect them?
Given that they have that relationship, making sure that they have some basic personal protective equipment, so the mask and gloves. So we're ensuring that one of the jobs and one of the tasks and work that we're doing is around procuring and providing PPE to different cadres of health professionals, but including community health workers. So that's one. I mean, I think their role is critical, not only around COVID-19 and ensuring that they're protected, but also around ensuring that people continue to go to the health clinics for other non-COVID-19 reasons. So, you know, ensuring that people get their treatment for HIV/AIDS or attend the antenatal clinic, all that is also equally critical. And I would say, finally, you know, ensuring testing much more, you know, the more testing we have, the stronger the stronger position we will be in to have an idea of trends and where the cases are, and then to start contact tracing and so on. Without that testing, we have the PPE and the physical distancing, which is the advice and guidelines that we've been given, but not much else, and that's really quite critical.
What is the priority for Amref during this COVID-19 pandemic?
So the priority is really is training those community health workers so they can really spread the word, work with communities, be creative on how they spread the word. So we've been doing ads on TV. We're working with young people to spread the word through social media. So really awareness raising on prevention and on identifying the signs. Then the second priority beyond raising awareness is ensuring people, frontline workers, are equipped. So PPE, and so on. And then the third priority is ensuring we do not disinvest in all the other essential health services and you know, diseases like TB, malaria, HIV/AIDS, and so on, as well as the very important antenatal and postnatal care.
Ms. Knox Peebles, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lino. Thanks.
That was Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu speaking to Camilla Knox-Peebles, CEO of Amref Health Africa UK. Scientists worldwide are looking for a vaccine that protects against COVID-19. Others are searching for a treatment to knock out the virus until a vaccine is available. VOA's Carol Pearson reports that researchers in Sweden are optimistic about their work on a treatment that could slow the progression of the disease, ease the symptoms, and save lives.
Tyson may become the world's most famous alpaca. Researchers from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm have immunized him with coronavirus proteins and isolated tiny antibodies, known as nanobodies, in his blood. Antibodies are proteins that are produced by your immune system when it senses the body has been infected with a virus or another foreign body. The proteins then try to kill it off. Nanobodies are far smaller than the antibodies humans produce, and nanobodies bind to the same part of the virus that human antibodies do. Gerald McInnery is one of the scientists working on this project.
So these are the antibodies that we took from the alpaca's blood cells, and we can see that those antibodies are bound right on the surface, exactly at the point that the viral protein needs to get into cells. And so this gives us a structural understanding of how these antibodies work to stop the infection.
McInnery says the results will be published in a few months. The work could lead to a drug that would help reduce the amount of virus in a patient's blood, while the immune system develops its own response to the infection.
All the evidence would suggest that it will work very well in humans, but it's a very complex system, so we look forward to getting to do those experiments.
A vaccine could take years to develop, which is why the scientists at the Karolinska Institute focused on developing a treatment. It could help stop the pandemic while a vaccine is being developed that offers long-term immunity. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
Today in our series COVID-19 Diaries from Ivory Coast, we take you to Abidjan, where the measures to slow the coronavirus outbreak have been reduced. The 2-month curfew has been lifted, and the traditional open-air restaurants called Marquee have been allowed to reopen. Akabla Beayude is a restaurant owner who whose business has been negatively affected by the crisis.
The damage is tremendous, and it has a domino effect. You see, I am a restaurant owner. I employ people, and these people rely on the income that comes from my restaurant. So suddenly it all stopped. Everything related to it, too. The purchases, the contacts, the deliveries. It's like a chain. It all goes down, too. It also has an impact there, so the damage is really huge.
Les dégâts sont énormes.
I can say without exaggerating that it created a sense of misery. We have not received any help from the government. I wonder if we ever will. During their decision-making, they did not take us into consideration. If they want to help, they need to be organized. And we weren't even considered, although we pay our taxes. On what basis will they compensate or help? So no, I have not been compensated, and I will not be compensated. In the transportation sector, contamination happens very, very, very fast. They let them work while taking precautionary measures. But they did not do so for catering. Catering is necessary. They could have organized us as well. Asked us, for example, to distance clients a meter apart. We also shouldn't limit ourselves to ways to stop the pandemic. What about afterward? If I open tomorrow, I will insist that my clients wash their hands when they enter and when they leave the restaurant. So that's how the pandemic affected us. The future rests in God's grace.
Wednesday, we'll visit Cameroon, where the general manager of Atipec Auto will explain how the COVID-19 crisis is affecting his business. So be sure to join us. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.